Growing up, I loved Streets of Rage 2. I'd always pick Skate, of course, and have an awesome time losing myself in this beautiful, pixelated fever dream of neon cities, ragging on dudes named Joseph, Donovan, and, Galicia, and jamming out to that awesome soundtrack. And then I grew up and realized that the Dreamcast version I was playing had a soundtrack that paled in comparison to the Genesis's version, and I fell in love anew. There's something weirdly therapeutic to the mindless nonsense of a side-scrolling beat-em-up game that just makes them work in spite of how repetitive they can be. And now, with the new Streets of Rage coming 16 years after the last entry in its series, I found myself looking to other games in the genre to help fill the void until then. And while there have been a few notable entries in the genre lately, one game in particular has been produced just out of everyone's eye over the past few years in Steam's Early Access program, leading to a final official release last November, the TakeOver, out now on Steam and coming to Switch and PS4 sometime this year. So to be fully transparent, I was able to receive a copy of this game through my YouTube network with keys provided to them by the developer. But even if I hadn't, I've backed a prior game from this developer before on Kickstarter, and keys to the TakeOver were offered to backers as a sort of apology for how that process went. If you'd like to hear more about that Kickstarter, well, click the iCard to open a link to Crymore Gaming's channel and you'll hear us talk a whole lot more about that. With disclosure out of the way, let's move right along. Pelican 13 is the lead developer of the TakeOver, and looking over his past work, you'll see that there's a lot of reverence and references to Sega's past work. And as someone who has a deep interest in Sega's work myself, I've found myself following his projects for quite some time now. As you can no doubt tell at a glance, the TakeOver is an unabashed love letter to Streets of Rage and other games of its kind like Final Fight. From picking apples and hamburgers out of objects in the environment to a big flashing GO sign on the right end of the screen, all the way to these characters even looking like doppelgangers of their characters, yeah. It's pretty derivative, but that's not inherently a bad thing. Keep in mind that this game entered early access in 2016, a time when the notion of a new Streets of Rage seemed impossible. Games like this were made to help fill the void that larger publishers were unwilling to fill themselves at the time. But it takes more than an appeal to nostalgia to make a game enjoyable, and in my opinion, despite some negatives, the TakeOver is a surprisingly fun beat-em-up. I'll lead with one of those negatives as it's arguably the least important part to a game like this, its story. I don't tend to enjoy straight up dismissing aspects of games in that way, but the Steam description doesn't even mention its story at all, not even for like a plot summary, so I don't think I'm off base in saying that. Essentially, a little girl named Vanessa has been kidnapped and Ethan, Megan, and a guy they know named Connor team up to beat up dozens and dozens of people to rescue her from the evil clutches of Freya. Also, there's zombies and talking werewolves for like a little bit. Yeah, it's there. I do enjoy the presentation of the cutscenes. The comic book style works well, and perhaps unintentionally reminds me a little bit of Comic Zone. I like how expressive the characters can be here, even if it clashes a bit against their in-game models. The voice acting, on the other hand,
But we'll get to the bottom of this.
Yeah. I just have a bad feeling there's more to this than we know.
Me too. Right now, though, we gotta keep pushing.
Look, it's not outright bad, but varying microphone quality and audio balancing doesn't do it many favors. But again, it's hardly the focus here, and if you really aren't feeling it, you're always given the option to skip it. So yeah, let's talk about the actual meat on the bone. If you've played Streets of Rage, you pretty much know how this game plays and roughly how it feels. You move left, right, up, and down with awkward walk cycles to navigate a playing field. Enemies will enter, you'll dispatch them, and you'll be allowed to advance to the right to progress the stage. You have a surprising amount of attacks to wield here, with light combos, heavy combos, juggling options, grabs and throws, dash moves, aerial moves, a special attack that takes some of your health to use, and even the ability to just straight up whip out a gun and shoot, provided you have ammo. Eventually this meter here fills and you can press your light and heavy attack buttons at the same time for a screen clearing move, which doesn't clear the screen as well as I'd like, but it gets enemies off your behind in a pinch. There's also a rage meter that fills up. When you activate it, you block all incoming attacks and do extra damage. Very nice. Oh, also sometimes you can find weapons you can pick up, like swords, pipes, that sort of thing, that don't degrade easily and are honestly kind of overpowered, but hey, I'm not complaining. So it's more or less your typical arsenal for a game like this. When I first started playing, I was honestly surprised by how great the combo system felt to execute on. You can end attacks in a pummel downward that pile drives enemies, or you can knock them straight into the air to lead into another combo that sends them up again, or sends them away. These attacks hit hard, they hit fast, and they're backed by awesome sound effects that really give the attacks impact. I love just landing combo after combo in the game. Everything coalesces into a really great feeling. It's absolutely the kind of thing a game like this should nail, and a pretty damn good job is done here. Now, there are some robots you hit that make a weird noise later in the game that breaks that a bit, but at the same time, I don't know what it sounds like for a fist to hit pure metal, so what can I really say? Maybe it's spot on. When it comes to that flurry of fists, you have 3 options when starting a standard playthrough. Ethan is your typical Axel analog, being fairly well balanced and looking a little bit like Leon Kennedy. Megan has the proportions of Bayonetta and is a faster character who dishes less damage, and Connor is a tankier character who dishes more damage out with slower attacks. I tend to always gravitate toward faster characters as I don't enjoy bulkier characters in games like these, but I mostly found myself sticking with Ethan. There's no character like Skate here, unfortunately. If you care about spoilers, leave now, by the by, but there's an unlockable character named Jackson who you can play as after you beat the game, and he's actually my favorite of the bunch. His combos just feel fantastic to me, with him being a little overpowered and even able to knock back enemies just by whipping out a shotgun. That's honestly very handy when you're being piled up on. Playing through the story as him is a little odd since the cutscenes don't account for him being there, but I had even more fun on a second playthrough with him than I did the first time around. So the characters are pretty fun and the combo system is surprisingly satisfying, which begs the question, how is a playthrough of this game? Well, it's good. It's fun. Beat 'em ups are a weird thing to critique because it seems like they often just work or they're boring, and the reasons why they fall into either side tend to boil down to very simple statements. So please forgive me if my critiques of this game are simple statements, but sometimes simple statements convey everything. The takeover on normal difficulty is a pretty enjoyable experience, but my main sticking point is that the stages are just too long. There are 7 stages in the game, each broken up into multiple segments. You'll travel through a city, into a barcade with... There it is. Damn, I can't even play 90s Arcade Racer in this game either. Anyway, you get the idea. Cities, sewers, ships, elevators, forests with zombies, all your usual tropes are here. There's nothing really wrong with any of them on their own. The difficulty of the enemies ramp up in a pretty satisfying way, and only rarely does it ever feel like the game is throwing too many enemies at you at once. But they can all go on just a bit longer than they should. One thing I don't like as much that exacerbates the issue is that the game occasionally flashes a danger warning sign at set points and stages, and almost always tasks you with jumping over obstacles that will damage you if you mess up. It's fine for a few times, but feels a bit much like busy work from then on and just kind of drags things out a bit over the duration of the game. I'm not against doing things other than beating up enemies in a beat 'em up, but each time these obstacles whirred by, I just found myself wanting to get back to beating up the enemies. Speaking of doing things other than beating up the enemies in a beat 'em up, there are stages that change up the gameplay style, one being a car chase and the other where you fly a jet fighter. These are pretty overt references to other games, but they both feel just underdeveloped enough to come off as a little more random than cool. Like, this car chase is pretty neat at first, but it just sort of happens without a defined boss or main objective of sorts, and then, back on to beating up. And this afterburner sequence got me kind of excited, but I think it needed just a little more flair for the amount of time it lasts, as a little around the halfway point, I was ready to just land and get back to things. These sections aren't bad though, and ultimately we're talking about a couple parts of the game that last a total of a few minutes, so I'm not really bothered. I just wish these were a little more fleshed out, as they do help break up the pacing of the game rather nicely, and perhaps with a couple more stages in either style, could have gone even further to that end. I also have some minor nitpicks with the bosses, and these are quirks that are just down to my personal preference, but there's an endless stream of enemy grunts that respawn as you dispatch them during the fights. I always found myself wanting to focus on the boss, but knowing that these guys are literally endless is a weird mental block I can't get around. Not helping is that bosses have invincibility frames for certain attacks, and combined with some more annoying enemy attack patterns, you can find yourself getting flexed on pretty well at times due to these design choices. Also, unless I'm missing something, bosses seem to be able to get a free hit on you right at the start of a fight, which, fine, I guess, but I'm not wild about it personally. This comes to a head in the final boss fight, which you would expect to be pretty hard, of course, but man, I tried switching over to Connor and wound up cheesing it, but be ready for a challenge when you get to the end of the game. Unless you're good at games, unlike me, in which case you'll probably be fine. Did I mention there are zombies and talking werewolves? I did? Okay, I just want to make sure I mentioned that they're in here. But yeah, really my main criticisms against the game are just that the stages can feel too long and that I wish things were different about the boss fights. I want to add, the bosses might be easier with the game's co-op option, but I don't have any friends, so I can't speak to that. There are also some challenge modes and the like if you want to dig into those, as well as a relaying character mode to play through the game as, but when it comes to games like these, I'm more than satisfied with just going through the main romp. I'd also like to add that the music is pretty good in this game, especially the first stage's track. It really captures that Yuzo Koshiro Streets of Rage feeling, and oh, that specific one was actually composed by him. That would explain it. The rest of the soundtrack is no slouch either. There's a lot of rock, but the production value is pretty good, and there's plenty of great tracks here. So yeah, that's the TakeOver. Is it the greatest recent beat-em up? No, I don't think it is. But as an overt tribute to games of the past, I think it succeeds in paying homage while offering just enough of its own flavor so as to not be completely derivative. If you've played Streets of Rage 4 or River City Girls and still have an itch that needs to be scratched, then the TakeOver is definitely a title worth considering. It's not the best of the bunch, but coming from such a small team, it was hard to not be impressed by it. If you've played the game, let me know down below if you agree with me, or just let me know about any recent great beat-em-ups that people should try. And if you'd like to hear me talk about more Sega games, feel free to check out my video on the Panzer Dragoon remake. That link will be just below the video. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and do take care. This video was made possible thanks to the help of my patrons, particularly Buckles Chuck Low, Calico Plus, Goldstorm07, The Legend of Groose, Potate Jello, Patrick Thompson, Jeet, and The Crazy Even. Thank you.